This is WVBN from the United Kingdom. The Fleet Air Arm got into a dispute with the Royal Air Force this week over the procurement of advanced fighters. The FAA requested the production of 50 of the new Seafire carrier aircraft, a modification of the new Spitfire. The RAF pushed back immediately, as they saw no reason the FAA needed new aircraft when the greatest threat to British soil remained German air attacks from the mainland. They successfully argued that the Spitfire was desperately needed to keep Britain safe, while the older Fulmar was still fully capable of serving the needs of the Royal Navy. Nevertheless, the FAA was able to successfully argue some of their points about overseas territory, and Churchill himself reminded the RAF they had previously dismissed another request for 50 aircraft. Eventually, the RAF conceded 10 Seafires for provision to the fleet. These would be evaluated for future production, but the RAF maintained the right to seize any Seafires in production should they be needed for Britain's defenses. Only those already finished would be kept in the fleet. Should a future dedicated production line be established for Seafires, the Royal Navy would have all the fighters they needed. The French fleet stranded in New Caledonia put out a distress call for any nearby British or Commonwealth forces. With Morgana interference in the north, the only place they could be escorted to resupply was Sydney Harbour. British command decided that a small task force consisting of Achilles, a number of other Bells, and other veterans of the Battle of Sydney would pick them up and hastily bring them to safety. The trip to New Caledonia was uneventful, and upon arrival the British brought the French forces into their protective net. Though the French could not get ammunition, they were still thankful to be brought to a friendly port. This time, the Morgana fleet attacked as soon as they were out to sea. Vampire and Vendetta corralled submarines to be destroyed by depth charges, and Manchester and Achilles battered down enemy cruisers and destroyers with superb gunfire. Sydney herself also brought down many vessels, with her guns briefly hitting harder and more accurately from her unawakened Belle. The Morgana continued to harass the fleet, but were driven off each time. The greater threat was the constant fog, causing the fleet to become lost a number of times, but did not result in any losses itself. Eventually, the fleet arrived back safely in Sydney Harbour to a heroic welcome. With the imminent invasion of Guam, priority was given to the repair and resupply of vessels scheduled for the operation, leaving the French without supply until more could be located, effectively stuck in Sydney. Miraculously, one of the lost supply ships had been beached in northern Australia, and its supply of ammunition was quickly brought down to resupply the French heavy guns. Smaller calibers were attempted to be sourced elsewhere, but all that could be mustered were stationing some towed British guns for air defense around the harbor. In the meantime, the fleet prepared for their next assignment at Guam. In Canada, efforts to bolster the Royal Canadian Navy began with the training and procurement of officers domestically and from Britain itself. New colleges opened and recruits were sought from veteran naval officers. To combat the lack of vessels, the Canadians were authorized to purchase the designs of several older V and W class destroyers, to be modernized and constructed within Canada itself. The C-class cruiser was also sought as a way to modernize Canada's cruiser fleet. This was hoped to both satisfy the Americans and more quickly resolve the Atlantic situations. These efforts secured Canadian Prime Minister Mackenzie King a second term, and Canada would soon be producing a navy of its own. In the Atlantic, Admiral William Whitworth set out to hunt down the pirate calamity that had been plaguing the Atlantic. Joining him were squadrons and Bells such as Ark Royal, Acasta, and Keith. These ships joined together and began their hunt. Calamity herself was not seen, but many lesser Morganas were put down by the guns and aircraft of Ark Royal, Nubian, Cossack, and Zulu. Together, they shattered the northward blockade near the Azores, freeing much of the Atlantic around the home islands for the first time since the war began. Scouting information did not turn up Calamity herself, but did discover more chilling mist to the west. Keith and Acasta reported that it was of a different variety than Calamity, and so cold that even Acasta herself was shivering. Any Morgana force coming from the mist was speculated to result in a large battle. The submarines Seawolf, Swordfish, and Oxley continued to hunt Morgana and German merchant ships after the successful boarding of a ghost ship. Swordfish was slightly damaged during an engagement, but the trio was otherwise successful. In less fortunate news, the Admiralty labeled Spearfish as lost with all hands, having been missing in action since the beginning of February. In Hong Kong, Indian troops continued to prepare for the invasion of Guam, while a Soviet cargo ship was searched under suspicion of aiding the German war effort. Soviet diplomats protested and demanded the ship's immediate release and the cessation of future searches. Royal Oak's repairs continued, but the repeated handwritten requests for snacks, the movement of other vestures around the ships, and requests for the bridge to be emptied began to arouse suspicion among the workers. Despite these requests being fulfilled, the notes continued to appear requesting the exact same, leading officers to suspect all was not well with the slumbering bell. In South Africa, sedition continued to attack cargo ships leaving and entering the Dominion. Most were sunk, but some had their entire cargo replaced with ramshackle radios, each set to broadcast sedition's messages, as sedition was apparently quite upset that the mysterious protector of the region was causing her messages to be tuned out. Most were destroyed and few listened to them, especially with the equally mysterious emergence of high-quality radios constructed of wood and gold etching. Eventually, sedition seemed to simply leave the area, and the remaining ramshackle radios broke down out of range of their broadcaster. Triumphant music played on the high-quality radios to celebrate. Following the passing of New Zealand Prime Minister Michael Savage from cancer, Peter Fraser was elected to succeed him, and who quickly vowed to continue the fight against the Morganas. An opposition party was formed led by radical socialist John Lee and a handful of other members of parliament. During a session of the All-Indian Muslim League, a resolution was passed calling for the independence of a British India for Indian Muslims. Some saw it as yet another secessionist movement, while others saw it as an attempt to partition India for Muslims and Hindus. Britain authorized a Spanish trade agreement for a £2 million loan to assist with reconstruction after the Civil War. This has been WVBN from Great Britain.